Welcome back and thank you for joining me now for our faith panel. I'm so excited because joining me actually in the flesh in the studio, we have Rabbi Jeremy Lawrence with us, and then on screen, sadly couldn't be here in the studio, but he's still loved, Dabinderjit Singh, Principal Advisor of the Sikh Federation. Let me, in anticipation, throw out a question to my audience. In a little while, I'm going to be asking our faith panel, the second part of this. In the light of Oxford University returning a 500-year-old sculpture of a Hindu saint to India, it was obviously taken, it was swiped. My question, and then there's so many, isn't there? There's the last May, Queen Camilla wore the crown with the Koh-i-Noor diamond. Should that be returned? The Elgin marbles and so on and so forth. My question to you, though, if there's this wonderful artifact in your home, absolutely gorgeous, been in the family for centuries or years and years and years, and you find out that it has been stolen, morally, should you fess up and return it? Or do you say, well, you know, it's finders keepers, and we can hold on to it because I didn't actually steal it. It was somebody I hadn't even met in my past. So my question to you, what do you do morally? Do you return those stolen goods? Should Britain be returning things that were swiped over the years? Or do they say, well, it wasn't us, Governor, it was our ancestors, we're going to keep it? 0344 499 1000. You can text the word talk to 87222 or X at Talk TV. That'll be my second question to my faith panel. The first question being, the Dutch, as you may or may not know, was the first country to legalise euthanasia, or assisted dying, as they call it there. Now, because of a legal challenge, it's not just people with physical illnesses, with illnesses from which they won't recover. Now, if somebody has unbearable suffering through mental health issues, they too can have assisted dying. And it's actually happening. Now, one doctor who's done this has carried out the procedure himself since last year. He's euthanized 9 patients, one as young as 16 years old. And these are people not with physical illnesses, but with maybe depression, what have you, saying, I don't want to go on. By the way, it's quite, when they have to go on a waiting list for 2 years, many people take themselves off the list. One of the things he's actually said, though, is that he says, the hardest part is grappling with the morality of my actions. I don't know what I'm doing in the spiritual sense. He says, I hope I end suffering from people, but I don't know the meaning of life or suffering. I can only trust my own conscience. My question, and I'll start with you, Rabbi, through the eyes of your faith, can someone who's helping people end their lives condone it spiritually because they're ending someone's suffering?
Wow, so that's a huge question. The Jewish teaching on euthanasia in any active sense, Trisha, is no. You shouldn't end someone's life. And the Jewish teaching on every moment of life is essentially that it has infinite worth. It's very difficult to handle. And certainly as we've got a greater understanding of pain and suffering, the rabbis have understood that at end-of-life times, the palliative care and removing pain is treatment and therefore can be done. And can be done even though the increase of medication might actually bring end-of-life closer. It's the way the opiates, for example, work.
Yeah.
So there is a greater understanding than previously. And the Talmud tells this really interesting story about Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Judah the Prince, who is the leader of the Jewish community in around the 2nd century. And he is dying. And all of his students, which is the entire rabbinic leadership, everybody is busy praying for him at his bedside. And, whether the prayers are making a difference or the noise is keeping him alive or whatever it is, he's just unable to die. And his, I think it's his servant, goes upstairs to the room above and takes a vase and throws it out of the window so that it smashes on the ground beneath. And the distraction is such that suddenly all the students stop praying, and for whatever reason, a Rabbi Judah the Prince has the peace to die because the students are no longer praying for him. And the story is recorded in the Talmud. And so Jews have been studying it for 1700 years as a story, and working with the idea that sometimes there is an understanding that even though it is painful to let someone go, sometimes you have to let someone go. And sometimes, even though there is an impulse to hold on, all the students had it. Sometimes the right thing is to let someone go. And it's very, very difficult. Now, at the beginning of your question, you talked about the change in what is happening to allow mental illness to become one of those conditions.
Yeah.
And of course, you and I know that number one, mental illness covers a whole plethora of illnesses.
Yeah.
And number two, you and I know that mental illness is also very, very real. And the pain of somebody with the most terrible depressions and apprehensions, anxieties and fears is very, very real. So I think it's wrong. I think it's wrong to draw some of the distinctions that come out of mental illness. The problem I'm really worried about is those kids who are going to be bullied into thinking their lives are so worthless that they're going to want to have it ended all.
16. So down to one of the patients was 16, and depression. And as I mentioned there, they have to go on a waiting list for 2 years, and many of those people with, who said, I don't want to live anymore, I want to, medically assisted dying, have taken themselves off the list during that 2 years. So the process can only take 6 weeks. So how many of those people who've ended their lives within 6 weeks, if they'd had to wait 2 years with help, would still be here?
So where's the help we should be offering them? What are the precautions and safeguards that we should be providing rather than allowing the assisted dying? I mean, I've encountered the actual suicides, and I've encountered the botched suicides and the guilt and everything that comes after that. Fortunately, so many people realize that actually they were better loved and they can be better loved, and their friends rally round.
Let me come to. I'm interested in Dabindrajit. What are your thoughts, Dabindrajit? What does the Sikh faith tell you about this?
I think the different faiths are not going to depart from the line that actually it's God's will that needs to prevail, and therefore, as human beings, we shouldn't interfere with God's will. So if somebody is seriously ill, at a human level, we might not want to see them suffer. However, from a faith perspective, the Sikh faith is very clear. Euthanasia and assisted dying is completely out of the question. And I'll go further to say suicide is a no-no. Taking someone's life through the death penalty is a no-no. It's actually saying God has sent us to this earth, and only God determines when we die. It could be tomorrow, and we could be fit and healthy. And I would just give a couple of examples from my own personal life. I remember, a very elderly lady who was given 24 hours to live, and her family went there and prayed. And they prayed, and she survived. She survived for 8 years. And the doctor said, I just don't understand it. The only thing I can think is your prayers help. She saw 3 of her sons who were praying die before her.
Gosh.
And therefore, it's an example of where, God's decision about her life was she was going to live longer, but her sons weren't necessarily going to live longer. And I would go further and say this is a really slippery slope, because today we could be talking about, when people are physically ill, mentally ill. Tomorrow we could be talking about, the world is getting increasingly populous. You could have people saying, when you reach a certain age, you probably shouldn't live. And we've just seen D-Day marked, and we've just seen that 100-year-old marry a 96-year-old.
Yes.
That is the beauty of life. And we don't have a right to take that life away. That's only God's right.
Thank you. Thank you both. We're going to take a quick break and then we'll come to our second question for our faith panel.
The home of common sense is going digital. Make sure you're ready. Listen to Talk on radio via DAB+ or your smart speaker, or watch it live on YouTube on your connected TV.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to our faith panel with Darbinderjit Singh, who's Principal Advisor at the Sikh Federation, and we have Jeremy Lawrence. Rabbi, thank you for actually joining me here in the studio. We were just talking about euthanasia. I've got a message here. Hi, Trisha. I strongly believe in euthanasia, but only if someone is in severe pain with no hope of ever getting well. Not for someone who's depressed because they could recover, or somebody who just doesn't want to be here. When my first late husband had terminal cancer, no recovery possible, he asked me to help him die. Of course, I couldn't, but I said I would to appease him. Then he told the doctor I was trying to bump him off because the cancer had spread to his brain. He eventually died anyway, but his death was a dreadful one. Euthanasia would have been a godsend, but he wouldn't have wanted that. It's a hard one. It is a hard one. That's lovely Penny from Essex. Hi, Trisha. Are you here in the UK? Yes, I am. You look fab. I'm glad to hear you're covering euthanasia issue for mental health patients in the Netherlands. I found this very disturbing when I read about it. I strongly believe mental health conditions can all be treated if the appropriate treatment is given. The problem is many people are not given that opportunity. Thank you, Rachel. And I'm not going to get popular by talking about how little either political party has talked about it. There we go. So, Rabbi, I'm going to throw this first question at you. So, Oxford University is set to return a 500-year-old sculpture of a Hindu saint to India. Last May, of course, Queen Consort Camilla, she wore the Queen Mary's crown with the Kohinoor diamond. In 2022, Oxford and Cambridge University said that they would return collections from the Benin bronzes after Nigeria requested them. There are many, many instances of this. So my question is, if your ancestors steal something from someone or a country, and making it personal for our audience, if you've got this lovely vase or something in your house and you discover it was stolen by your great-great-great-grandfather, once you know it was taken without permission, is it morally up to you to return it or not?
So, there's a legal dimension to it and a moral dimension to it. And you ask about great-great-grandfathers. So my great-grandfather's flat house in Wiesbaden in Germany
I know Wiesbaden, yeah.
is a block of flats now, right? Like, he didn't agree to leave it when he was driven out of the country by Hitler. And my mother and I have stood in the street looking up at, what's a very nice area.
So just for people who don't know, during coming up to the war, during the war, my
great-grandfather,
he owned this property, but
100%.
as many hundreds of thousands, millions of Jews were chased out of their property. It was confiscated. They were, if not killed, they were sent off to camps. And it no longer belonged to them.
It was they were deprived of citizenship. Right? Hey, it was an American barracks at the end of the war, and then taken by the state. And the people who are living there are perfectly entitled to feel they've paid their rent, they've bought their houses. Why should they give them back? They're from the person that probably bought it through a couple of, changes of property. So there's a legal question as well as the moral one. Morally, I can't expect anybody who owns one of those apartments to give back my great-grandfather's house. Now, morally, I think it's important to look at some of the qualities of the properties that we're talking about. Some are heritage items. Some of them are objets d'art. And they could be shown anywhere. And indeed, with technology, some of them can actually be replaced or replicated so that you can get to see them. Through technology, you can do virtual tours of galleries. So I think as long as those things are being preserved, I can't see why they shouldn't be given back to people who are able to look after them, countries that are able to look after them correctly in their museums. I think that objects of worship, those things that belong to a people's cultural heritage, those areas like in the Antipodes where you're worried that their souls are bound up in the correct forms of burial, to hold on to those, to hold on to idols that are important to other beliefs, I think is very, very, I think it's morally difficult to justify. And so there's the legal and there's the moral, and I think there's this moral dimension of what it's going to be used for. So I do believe in the main with Elgin marbles, the Benin bronzes, etc. I think that there ought to be an ability to have some kind of beneficial resolution where we show the objects in this country and they go back there and they're shown there, the things that belong on the Parthenon belong on the Parthenon. But there are cultural exchanges of objects.
But when it's something religious like this, and Derbinjit, you'd be really interesting on this because we're particularly talking about a 500-year-old sculpture of a Hindu saint. So do you morally, the same question, if your ancestors steal something from someone or a country, once you know it has been stolen, do you have a moral duty to return it or not?
This is very topical. You mentioned the coin or diamond, for example, which comes up every so often, and obviously came up with King Charles. We've actually, in the last few days, just documented there's over 1,000 Sikh artifacts in museums and libraries in the UK.
Wow.
We've gone very clear, and this ranges from the Coon or Diamond to the throne of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. And actually, if you look at history, following the First Anglo-Sikh War in 1845 and 1846, they can all be traced back to them. So these are effectively the spoils of war. Now, this creates a massive dilemma for Sikhs in this country because we believe those items are probably safer here.
Oh.
The reason why we say this is history tells us that, firstly, where would you return these items? Because India could say we want it, Pakistan could say they want it, because they didn't exist then, because actually it was a Sikh kingdom. So you could argue, and we do argue, they're actually being put on trust until, say, the Sikhs had a homeland. And in the meantime, Sikhs in this country and Sikhs across the globe are free to come here. And last week, we did briefly touch upon events of 1984. In June 1984, the Sikh Reference Library was burnt down by the Indian Army after they took control. And we'd written things like, that's like losing the Doomsday Book, the Magna Carta, or manuscripts, religious items for us. But equally, I think it's interesting what the rabbi had to say about religious artifacts. I think religious artifacts are different. And I think, and we do have a problem in this country, that sometimes our holy scriptures, which we regard as the living guru, sometimes been kept in the British Library or museums. And what and we've been talking to politicians about this because the law's been changed, the Charities Act's been changed, so museums can start to return things. And we're seeing it happen. It happened in, a museum in Glasgow returned 7 items last year to India. What we're saying is religious artifacts are best returned to the respective religious communities in this country because they can show it due respect. So it is a bit of a minefield, but people listening might find it surprising that I'm arguing they're actually safer here because that's what history's told us. And secondly, they should come to the Sikhs and no one else.
Absolutely fascinating. I learned so much during our faith panels, which is why I love doing them. Dabindajit Singh, Principal Advisor of the Sikh Federation, and Rabbi Jeremy Lawrence. So lovely to meet you in person. And Dabindajit, next visit, I hope you'll join us here and be able to join us here in the studio as well. My question to the audience, though, what do you think? If something, and I think we've had some really interesting points of view, if it's a piece of art, maybe, you know, wherever it can be shown, it should be shown. But Dabindajit brought in the fact is returning something. If you had this wonderful artifact or wonderful statue in your house and you knew it had been stolen, but you were going to return it to somewhere where it was going to be destroyed, then maybe you're better off hanging on to it. We've got a message here. Let's have a look. Stolen artifact. Someone who buys what is known to be stolen may not be considered a thief, but their purchase decreases the likelihood that the owner will ever get it back, the property back. Morally, I reject stealing, and that helps in any temptation to buy low-priced goods that are evidently stolen.